Today we are talking to Paul Bell, an independent strategic communications consultant based in the UK and Georgia. Hello, Paul.
Good morning, Chris, or good afternoon where I am.
Welcome. Paul, you were at the coalface of South Africa's first democratic election. You were the Chief Information Officer for the Independent Electoral Commission.
I was,
That was a
indeed.
time of great excitement and hope. What were your feelings about the future of South Africa then?
Then?
Yes.
Well, I think, for me, as it was for many, it was a it was a leap into the unknown, but a leap too that we had to make, given what the country had been through. You and I have known each other for a long time. We've lived through that time together as colleagues and friends. We were peripherally involved, I suppose, as journalists observing the enormous changes and the great violence, if you like, that affected our society at that time. Everybody knew that fundamental change was necessary, and from every possible standpoint, certainly from a moral standpoint. So we went into it, I think, with trepidation, but with hope, because we had leaders at that time who appeared to us to be people of great moral power and would guide South Africa safely through what was always going to be a complex and difficult transition. So yes, hope at the time, definitely.
Well, decades have passed. How do you feel about the future of South Africa now? How have your feelings changed?
I think we are all experiencing profound disappointment at the way things have transpired, simply because we see that so little real progress has been made on behalf of the ordinary people for whom, on whose behalf that struggle was waged by civil society, by labor, by leaders in exile, by people in South Africa who came, if you like, from the other side of the tracks, but absolutely knew that this was the right moral path to pursue. We had faith in those people, as I said before. That faith was simply not honored, I think, by the subsequent generations of leadership that have followed. And that has been a great disappointment. And the country is far less able now to meet the promises of 1994 than it was in 1994.
You recently wrote a paper on power for NATO, and you included South Africa. Please share with us what you wrote.
I suppose the part that you are referring to is that I saw and knew and worked alongside people who had, if you like, against what perhaps you might have expected of them given their backgrounds, nonetheless had committed themselves wholeheartedly to change and to freedom and to a society based on the equality of all and so on. And many of them moved into public office at different levels of society after the transition. And I think what we've seen since then is people like them either pushed out of office or having just become thoroughly disillusioned by everything that has happened since. many people are, as I've said, thoroughly disappointed. They've had all of their hopes and dreams and expectations turned upside down, and in many ways might feel too that they've even been made fools of. And that's a great shame.
Where has this left South Africa in the international political arena? What relevance does it still have now?
I think you have to see South Africa in its continental context. South Africa is still a significant player within Africa, within the 52, 53 states of Africa. Its economy is not what it was, but it remains a, relatively speaking, a powerful economy, a magnet for people throughout the southern African region, and indeed from further afield. There's no question that there are serious conflicts in different parts of Africa, and we have had a lot of migrants come to South Africa because it offers relative peace, stability, and opportunity to people who come, if you like, from even less. So in that sense, South Africa is significant, has to be taken into account. As a player in the global scene, perhaps we always took ourselves a little bit too seriously. Given the fact that we'd had decades of being in the global spotlight because of apartheid, perhaps this gave us a deeper sense of our importance than we were actually entitled to.
If the country sustains that level of relevance, then does its stance on the war between Russia and Ukraine, the Ukraine carry a lot of weight?
No, it doesn't carry a lot of weight. You have to ask yourself, why does South Africa take the position that it does on Ukraine? There are two perspectives or different points of view from which to look at this. The one is, a very partisan perspective, one that somebody like me, with my background and my experience, you might perhaps expect me to take. I am partisan. I'm living in a part of the world that has suffered under centuries of Russian occupation and dominance here in Georgia. So I live among people who have experienced, the force, the ugly brutality, if you like, of life under, a Russian jackboot. In this city, Tbilisi, where I've been living for almost 3 years, people still remember the sounds of Russian guns in the suburbs as recently as 2008, when this country was briefly invaded by Russia. This is a city that is deeply angered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the brutality that it has demonstrated. So for me, if you like, this has become personal. Okay, so therefore I am partisan. But if you look at South Africa as a polity, well, there is a long history among South Africa's leadership, a long history with the Soviet Union. Now, I don't think you necessarily can argue that the Soviet Union and Russia are the same place anymore, and I would say that anyone who looks back on the historical relationship between the Soviet Union and South Africa with fondness or gratitude, if you like, has simply just now got a misplaced sense of history and of priorities. That having been said, it's true that for South Africa and the continent as a whole, just bear in mind that South Africa is a part of Africa, and the attitudes of its leadership are part and parcel of, have shaped and are shaped by the African context in which they live. It's no surprise, therefore, that South Africa would feel beyond just simply the historical loyalties and so on, that policymakers would look at Ukraine and say, well, do we have a stake in this? Do we have reason to be concerned that we might end up on the wrong side of this conflict? Are we not experiencing some of the backwash that this war is costing us in terms of impact on our economies and so on? So much less commitment to supporting one side or another, perhaps more commitment to saying, well, can we find a quick peace and end to the conflict? Would that not be better for us all? And arguably, they would be right, unless, of course, you were putting that proposition to a Ukrainian or to a European, like I am or have become, who feels much more closely connected, if you like, to the to what is happening in Ukraine and to the potential consequences of a victory for Russia.
How does South Africa's position in BRICS influence its stance on this war?
Well, I think you have to sort of look at it from the perspective of, who's running the global order, the international order. And until the rise of countries like China and in its wake India and so on, the international order has been very much dominated by a Euro-Atlantic perspective, by the power of its economies, by the nature of its liberal democracies, and so on. All of these big dynamics, if you like, in the way that the world order has been managed. That's now significantly challenged by the rise of China and other nations, who are just basically turning around to let's say the North and saying, well, your priorities aren't our priorities. Okay, we have large numbers of people who have been, if you like, and remain historically disadvantaged, who remain poor, whom we have to create opportunities for. And several of those countries aren't especially democratic. China is an authoritarian state, or totalitarian state, in fact. India is becoming increasingly authoritarian. Other countries like Brazil and South Africa find themselves confronted by quite significant challenges to the notion that they should be democracies. So these are people who are, with the best will in the world, finding it complicated to actually do everything the way the Northern Hemisphere would like. And they resent its power. They resent its history. They resent the fact that relations between the North and South have been fraught by issues like, colonialism, slavery, etc. So we're coming at this from very different perspectives. Plus, I think you have to look at some of the conflict that has been going on, that has been driven by the actions of countries like the United States, for example, invading Iraq, invading Afghanistan, looking at the French and English intervention in Libya and the consequences of that. If you like, these inconsistencies, as they see it, inconsistencies in the application of international law. So arguing back to some extent, well, you complain about Russia invading Ukraine, but didn't the United States invade Iraq? Now, as I said, you can either either take my partisan point of view and say, well, that was, this is totally justified, or you don't. And I think the other thing that is important in Africa, and South Africa is a part of this, is that there's a long tradition of non-interference in the affairs of other states. I mean, I've always believed that African foreign policy generally is governed by the principle of, there but for the grace of God go we. So therefore, it's better that we stay out of somebody else's internal issues and problems, and not actually have anything to say about these issues, because who knows, it might be our turn next.
Paul, let me bring you back to the situation on the ground here in South Africa. There are rumblings of a revolution in the making. What do you think? What do you think the chances are of that happening, and if it does, of it being successful?
Oh, I've never thought South Africa to be open to revolution. South Africa is too big a country. It's got too many diverse points of power within it. It's very difficult for any one set of interests to dominate the country, especially from a security point of view, militarily. You might be able to take Johannesburg, but can you then take and hold Cape Town or Durban or whatever? I don't know, that's a very simplistic way to look at it, but no, I've always felt that South Africa's geopolitical, geoeconomic makeup and its ethnic makeup just militate against the prospect of revolution. That doesn't mean to say that you can't have significant instability, right? And I think what we are seeing increasingly is that order and authority are starting to break down in small bits. The system, as it has become over the last 30 or more years, is starting to be increasingly challenged. Clearly, there is a great deal now of unhappiness with the ANC. It's probably lost, who knows, maybe a third of its support, enough perhaps to safely deny it a safe majority at the next elections.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately that is all we have time for today.
Oh, well, there you go.